This time on Poll Hub, is it the dream job for your kid or is it a nightmare? We asked a question on a recent poll about whether you'd want your kid to grow up to be President of the United States. And, well, an awful lot of Americans don't seem to have a very high opinion of this supposedly hardest and best job in the world, despite the access to Air Force One. We'll talk about that. Then, our student producers have a vested interest in the next segment. We're talking with David Deming from Harvard's Kennedy School about whether a college education is still worth it as prices have soared and graduates leave with mountains of debt. And finally, the ultimate question, the Beatles or Houdini? Huh? Yep, that was our reaction to this week's fun fact as well. Stick around, we got plenty to do. Let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm Athen Hollis. I'm Delaney Hayes.
And I'm Lee Marigoff.
Well, we start today with mixed feelings, or maybe it's just my mixed feelings about a question that we posed in one of our recent NPR PBS News Marist polls. And that question is whether or not Americans would want their child to be president of the United States. And what we found is that 60% of Americans would not want their child, and this is regardless of whether or not they do have children, to become president. And that's up from 54% in 2018. So, Lee, I want to start with you. What does this say about our politics?
It says that what was once something that parents might have been proud of way back when in decades long gone, that, gee, my kid could grow up to become president, now is, my kid could grow up to become president. It's the opposite sentiment. And I think it has to do with sort of the relevance of the presidency, the disconnect, all those things we talk about, the lack of respect, the dissatisfaction, all the grumpiness that we see in our negativism in our politics does spill out, I think, on this question. And I must say, I'm surprised that it hasn't even gotten worse in the last six years or so since we asked it. Obviously, the numbers are not pretty and have gotten worse, but I'm actually surprised it didn't even get lower than it has been, suggesting that, there's still about a third, slightly more of the country would say, yeah, that'd be kind of a cool thing. And that surprises me. I can't imagine what the positive sentiment is unless it's power and fame and things like that, which still go with it, because it's a pretty brutal sport right now.
And there is bipartisan agreement on this question that at least a majority, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, and in fact, the proportion of independents is more than 6 in 10, would not want their child to be president of the United States.
So, Lee, did you ever want to be president when you were a kid?
I might have wanted to be a senator. I never really aspired to being president. I could have seen being a senator would have been cool. In fact, my roommate in college once made up a bunch of pencils that said Senator Lee Marigoff on them. I think I still have one somewhere in my house, but they're really a cottage industry at this rate.
I don't know. You could probably auction those off, raise some money for the poll. We could make new ones. Mary, did you ever want to be?
Little known fact. Yes, actually, I wanted to be the first woman president in the United States. And when I was in elementary school, I can't remember what grade, we had to, I think, write something and draw a picture. And I drew a picture of myself behind the desk in the Oval Office. And it was something that, an interest that I had, I would say probably late high school, early college. But then I didn't want the criticism. I grew up in the 90s, and as we know, there was a ton of criticism, and a lot of politicians were under the microscope, not as much as they are now. But I didn't want that. I didn't want to subject my family to that. Not that I had anything to hide, but I just didn't want that to happen. Jay, what about you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, absolutely. Same thing. It's like I thought, dying to do that? But no, but I thought that would be great. I would love to do that. I don't understand. I guess I don't get. It's the most powerful, most important job in the world, kind of, period, right? I don't think there's a lot of argument about that. Why wouldn't you want your kid to do that? Just because it's hard, or just because people are mean?
I think it's a target. The upside has become buried in all the criticisms and the being under the microscope.
I also think that it speaks to just how divided the country is and how visceral the opposition is based on the political divide. I mean, think about it. Politicians have always been open to threats, but I think it's become more heated. And so as a parent, you may not want your kid to face that kind of threat or harm.
And I think also the goal of accomplishing things. If you felt that your child as president could do X, Y, and Z, but then they say, well, are these really attainable in our current gridlock of life? And I just think it becomes less attractive.
I want to bring in a couple more numbers here. We take a look at the breakdown by age. Americans under the age of 30, 69% are more likely than any other age group. And again, this is a relative comparison because it is at least a majority regardless of age. But those under 30, 69% would not want their child, if they had children, to become president. And Athen and Delaney, let's just say neither of you have children, but if you did have a child, or would you want him or her, they, to become president?
I think I'm in the majority. I think if I were to have a hypothetical child, I wouldn't want them to be president. I feel like maybe when I was a kid, I kind of saw it as like an honorable position. But I think after, growing up in the time period and seeing like the last two presidencies, I don't know. I don't know if I see it as much of an honor anymore, or as kind of a position where you have to give up certain morals to get to. I don't think I would ever want a child to have to go through that to get to that position.
Delaney, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with Athen. If I had this hypothetical child, I definitely wouldn't want them to be president. I'm not saying stray away from being like a politician altogether, but I think all the points that Athen mentioned are very valid. And also it's just like a dangerous job altogether. And I think it has been throughout history. I mean, we talked about kind of just like the target on your back, and with so much power comes so much responsibility, and then comes blame from the entire country. So I definitely wouldn't want my kid going through that, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, the lack of privacy. We talked about the microscope. So I started the segment by saying that we're going to talk about some mixed feelings, and I do have mixed feelings. I mean, one of my three, I think, would probably be open to that idea. One of mine is very politically engaged, even at the ripe old age of 11, and has been for a few years. And yeah, would it be cool for my kid to be president? Absolutely. But would it be horrible for my kid to be president? Absolutely. And so that's why I'm a little torn on this question. Whereas maybe, like you said, a couple presidencies ago, I would have been like, yeah, all about it. I think it would be amazing for my child to make such a difference. But now I don't know, how much of a difference he would make. So,
well, let's think pluses though. You get Air Force One. You don't have to wait in traffic jams. I mean, maybe we should turn this around and say, all right, what would be the good things that come with this? I mean, not just all the negatives. You get, state dinners. You don't have to do your laundry, do food shopping. I mean, there's some positive.
Well, he's also 11, so he doesn't even qualify to be president for a long time. By then, maybe things will have changed and it won't be perceived to be such a hard, terrible, punishing job.
Lee, don't worry. We'll get you a flight on Air Force One.
Yeah, we'll put your son on the next poll. We'll see if he can register some support and get this thing off the ground. No pun intended there.
So the commencement speeches and hat tossing are largely finished as a new class of college grads heads off to find jobs or more education in grad school. So we thought it was a good time to ask, is college really worth the cost?
Then let's start with the money. What exactly is the cost on average to go to college in America?
Well, according to the College Board, in the 2022-2023 school year, the average cost of tuition at a public four-year school was $10,940 for in-state residents, $28,240 for out-of-state. Private four-year colleges, where I work and that you just attended, averaged $39,400 per year.
Yeah, yikes. That's the same price as a new car every year, or a really nice car in 4 years.
Yeah, you could have had a really fancy BMW or something instead. But yeah, I think the college education's worth it. But that's what we're trying to find out. It should be noted that these numbers do not include room and board, books, all those other expenses, everything else that adds up. And it really does make this a very expensive proposition.
It's a lot of money, and few 18-year-olds are going to be able to pay this out of pocket while in school. And it's a stretch for many families to even be able to pay this. So plenty of students are taking out student loans.
Yeah, each year between 30 and 40% of undergraduate students in the U.S. take out federal student loans. 70% of students with bachelor's degrees end up with some education debt by the time they graduate. The question, though, is, are these loans worth it? Not just is college worth it, but is it worth it to take out the loans to do this?
It's a tough question to answer because there's so many factors that go into it. But one way to look at it is this: what are loan burden young people giving up due to their college debt?
So Gallup actually dug into this a little bit and found that 71% of student loan borrowers delayed buying a home, purchasing a car, or achieving other life milestones, as they describe them, due to their student loan debt. Here's the breakdown. 29% said they delayed buying a home. 28% delayed buying a car, 22% delayed moving out of their parents' homes, 20% delayed starting their own businesses, 15% put off having kids, and 13% put off marriage because of student debt.
Yeah, and nearly all of those things have been happening later in Americans' lives for decades. And college debt may be a part of the reason for these trends, although these delays in big life events we've also seen been occurring in non-college grads as well.
Yeah, so maybe there's another way to look at the question. This question, is college even worth it? And it's a little bit more traditional. How much more are you going to earn in your lifetime with a college degree versus not having a college degree? According to a Pew poll from late 2023, only 1 in 4 Americans say it is extremely or very important to have a 4-year college degree in order to get a well-paying job. 40% say it is not too or not at all important.
Yeah, so people are pretty mixed about how important a degree is to getting a job. But what about how this compares to before college got so expensive?
Well, again, from that 2023 Pew poll, 49% said it was less important to have a 4-year degree to get a job than it used to be 20 years earlier. 32% said it was more important, so kind of a mixed bag there.
Let's jump back to this question of student loans. Do people think getting loans to finance a college degree is worth it? Well, this Pew poll found that only 22% of Americans said the cost of a 4-year degree made it worth taking out loans. 47% said the degree is worth it, but only if students or families don't have to take out loans. And then there was a whole 29% that just said the cost of college is not worth it, period.
Ouch. That's not for you. You just graduated, and that's definitely not for you. There is some economic data that can help explain why Americans have these views, though. NYU professor and podcast host Scott Galloway, who writes the Popular Economics blog, he notes that a gallon of gas cost $1.19 in 1980. In 2021, when he was writing about this, gas was at $3.41. That's where it is about now. So over 40 plus years, that equates to about a 2.7% annual increase. So every year, over 40 years, gas went up about 2.7%.
So how has college tuition increased?
Yeah, so that's the rub. The annual increase has been 6.7%. So every year, averaged over 40 years, college has gone up 6.7% at 4-year public schools and 6% at 4-year private schools. This means college costs have increased about 3 times as fast as the cost of gas and the cost of most consumer goods since 1980. That, when you add it up and you do all the math, that's almost a 1,400% increase.
Well, you have to think that salaries have also risen too. So does it still hold that a college degree means more earnings over a lifetime?
Well, Anthony, I think you're going to be surprised, but there's actually data for that too. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, those with only a high school diploma or GED make about $899 on an average per week. Those with bachelor's degrees make $1,493 per week on average. That's $500 a week more.
Yeah, it's almost double the weekly earnings. But let's put that into even more long-term perspective. Studies show over one's working lifetime, those with only a GED or a high school diploma will earn about $1.3 million, whereas those with a bachelor's degree will earn $2.2 million over their lifetime.
Of course, that's not the only economic benefit. Those with bachelor's degrees are also less likely to be unemployed and more likely to be able to get a job on average, just in general. And according to that BLS survey in 2023, graduates have an unemployment rate of 2.2%, and those with only a high school diploma had an unemployment rate of 3.9%. So that's a big difference too.
So it does seem like the public perception of college and then how much it actually costs is not necessarily supported by data, but it also seems like one more set of statistics demonstrates a shift in how students are thinking.
And we do like statistics here. So here we go. We can see this change in the majors people choose for their degrees. In data collected by the National Center for Education Statistics, back in 1970, the number one major of U.S. college grads was education, 22.5%. Business was next, 14.4%. Then English, engineering, and history rounded out the top 5. Here's the most recent data from the same place. Business, number one, 19.2%. Then health professions at 12.8%. Then engineering, biology, and psychology. Big difference from 1970.
What do we think prompted these shifts in majors? So now we're going to talk to David Deming, an economist and professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, who's joining us now. So thanks for coming on, David.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right. So we have just gone over a bunch of data and seeing that there's a disconnect between opinion on whether college is worth it and then the actual data on college and salaries after. So considering the cost increase of a college education, do you think college is as worth it as it once was?
It's a great question. I think the answer is probably yes, but with some caveats. It takes longer for the benefits of a college education to pay off than it used to. That's for a couple of reasons. One is that the college wage premium, meaning the average difference in earnings between somebody with a college degree and somebody without, roughly doubles over the course of a person's life. So just to make it concrete, you earn about 20% more than a high school graduate right after you graduate from college. But by the time you're, in your 40s, my age, you earn, 50, 60% more. So it actually more than doubles from the beginning and kind of doubles on average over the course of your life. And so when you're first graduating from college, it doesn't feel like as big of a bargain as it ends up being. That's the first reason. I think the second reason is that people are borrowing a lot more to go to college than they used to in a previous generation. And that borrowing happens right up front. And so when you first graduate, you've got a big student loan bill and only a small earnings premium. But by the time you're in your mid-40s, you have hopefully no more student loans and a large earnings premium. So the benefits are delayed and the costs are borne up front. So I think that's a big reason why college is unpopular with people who just experienced it, in the case of new graduating seniors, or people who are paying for it, in the case of parents.
One of the things that we found was a poll that showed what people had given up or delayed. I should say delayed, not given up. And there were significant percentages that had delayed, marriage or having kids because of student loan debt. Obviously, student loan debt, huge issue right now. There's been the forgiveness. There's been lots of moves to do all kinds of things on that. You mentioned that student loan debt is a big reason that people are talking about the cost of college. How does that factor into how people should think about college? And what I mean by that is a 4-year in-state college, a public college, is a huge bargain compared to where I work and where you work, right? So is that something that changes, you think, going forward here, how people are thinking about higher education?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jay. So I think that it's a kind of a difficult issue to parse out. When people say they've delayed life events because of student loans, the question is compared to what? I think in their minds they're saying, well, if I didn't have a loan, I would have gotten married sooner, I would have bought a house sooner, and so on. And I think that's exactly right for that person. But if you're thinking about, should I go to college or the college for you, the question is, how much are you delaying those events versus not having gone to college at all? So if you didn't go to college, when did you get married versus if you did? If you didn't go to college, when did you buy a house versus when you did? And when you look in the data, there's a hugely strong positive relationship between going to college and getting married, between going to college and buying a home. And so I think what you're seeing there is people saying, wow, this loan feels burdensome. I wish I didn't have it, which is totally understandable. But I still think it's true that it's better to go to college and have a loan than to not to go to college and not have a loan, because then you don't earn very much. And when you don't earn very much, it's hard to get married, start a family. It's hard to buy a house. And so I think those are burdens for everybody. And we would love to be in a world where people didn't have to pay for college, but we're not in that world. So I think so I want to say that with sympathy. I'm not saying that we should dismiss people's concerns, but I do think it matters a lot what you're comparing it to.
And so we also looked at some data that shows a shift in what people are majoring in. As in maybe 20, 30 years ago, people were choosing more based on what they found interesting, as in now people are choosing more majors that will become more lucrative more quickly. And so do you think a shift in majors suggests a realignment of what colleges do?
I think it will in the long run. Colleges are often slow to respond. The question is, if you have, 6 people or 10 people in all of the classes in an English major, and you have 100 people in all the classes in a computer science major, how fast does the college respond by hiring more computer science faculty and fewer English faculty? Colleges typically don't respond as fast as student demand responds. And so that's why you have these differences in class size. So I think it is probably true that colleges, especially colleges that are under financial stress, as many of them are, will have to pivot more quickly. It's an actually difficult thing to do because the kinds of people who can teach computer science classes also are able to earn lucrative salaries in the tech sector. And so you have to pay a lot more for faculty who are in demand. That's also true in other professions, business, economics, things like that. And so those basic market forces affect colleges, despite many college administrators' reluctance to submit themselves to those market forces. So I do think, yes, you see that pressure, and some colleges respond a lot and some not so much, depending on politics and other considerations.
Wasn't that long ago that everybody thought that these massive online courses were going to change education and reinvent higher education? And I think we're hearing now in different ways from people like Elon Musk and others that the college part of a college education is less important than the education part. And we could just train up computer engineers in a 1-year course here and get all the same value. What does that say to you, and what do you think about that, especially when the value of the liberal arts education, at least in the public mind, seems to be slipping?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that. I have 2 reactions. One of them is that I do think I would defend the idea of a liberal arts education, not always the execution of it. But I do think there's something important about coming to college and learning habits of mind. Learning how to learn, people say. I think that's kind of a loose term. It doesn't really describe what happens. But I think there's a way actually to learn technical subjects that fulfill many of the goals of a liberal arts and sciences education. So I don't think those things are necessarily opposed. Like you're either learning a trade or you're learning liberal arts. I think there's a way to do it better. I don't think colleges should be in the business of training people for their first job because it's very time consuming. You go to college, spend 4 years of your life not earning any money and just learning. It's hard to do that when you're 40 or 50. Very few people do it. And so what that means is whatever education you get has to last not just this latest technological wave, but the ones to come. So the education really needs to be flexible and future-proof. It needs to teach you how to think and how to be in the world, not just, how to weld or how to code or whatever. So I think colleges should resist the temptation to become trade schools. So in that sense, I'm a little bit skeptical of it. At the same time, we can't sit here and pretend that an education should stay the same regardless of how the labor market changes. And so I think it's all about the balance, finding ways to teach sometimes technical subjects in a slightly more general curriculum. I think the best schools do that. You may or may not read the great books, but you find some way of teaching people a broader frame of thinking, teaching them critical thinking skills, teaching them how to work with each other, project-based learning, all the habits and skills that builds, while at the same time learning something that's useful in the economy.
And so we've heard a lot about student loan forgiveness programs. And do you think if these student loan forgiveness programs come to fruition, that it will change this cycle of is college worth it? And will it change the dialogue on the value of a college education?
Yes, I think it probably would. If we forgave student loans, I think people would, and particularly if we did it in a way that seemed like it was going to keep happening. So I think the issue with student loan forgiveness programs is we don't know whether this is a one-time thing. It's kind of making people whole who borrowed money a few years ago, but the tuition prices are not going anywhere. And so what about future borrowers? So I think economists, including myself, have been somewhat critical of student loan forgiveness programs in a vacuum. It's not that, I enjoy the idea that people are paying a lot of money and borrowing a lot of money to college. It's rather, it's kind of a one-time fix, and it's a fix for people who already made their decision rather than a forward-looking fix. And so I think if student loan forgiveness was in the context of some broader package to reduce the cost of college, I'd be very much in favor of that, and I've written some about that. I think a one-time forgiveness that's like a jubilee, that doesn't have any chance of persisting probably wouldn't have any, almost certainly wouldn't have any long run impacts on the way higher ed policy or higher ed works, because everyone knows that was just kind of a one-time thing. Maybe it was a response to the Great Recession or whatever. So I think time will tell whether the Biden administration's efforts to forgive student loans was a one-time thing or was part of some broader package. I think the policy to change the way income-based loan payments work was a pretty big change. Effectively, it's people who graduated and end up going into low-paying jobs don't end up having to pay back all of their loans over time. That's kind of reducing the cost of going to college in an indirect way. I think there's ways of doing that better in principle, but in practice, maybe that was the best way for the administration to do it. So I'm sympathetic to the overall concern of trying to lower college costs. The big issue, Athen, just to kind of answer your question in a roundabout way, that I see is that it doesn't actually do anything to address the root problem of rising costs of higher education. So you're saying, look, we're going to keep charging exorbitant prices. We're just going to forgive it all within 10 years. It doesn't actually make higher education more efficient. It doesn't actually bring down costs. So I would like to see more. To me, it's not enough on its own.
So it's interesting you come back to cost, because that's what I wanted to circle back to and maybe end with. There are moves, especially at small schools that I think have smaller student bodies and big enough endowments to pull this off, to basically make college free. Which is really going back to the future, because, City College in New York was free, for a generation that created, the greatest generation that created all of this economic wealth, because, at least in part, because college education was available through the GI Bill and all these other things. Is that just a niche movement? Can that grow? Is there enough money and willpower to make that grow, to lower the cost, if not that way, then through some other way? Or are the economic forces and kind of the motivations in place that are going to keep college from becoming, on average, not at one school, less expensive and more available and affordable to Americans?
It's a great question. I've written some about free college, and so I think whether it's a good idea or not, in my view, depends a lot on how it's executed. So if the one way to make college free is to make it cheap, what I mean by cheap is like lowering the quality of services. So like one way to make college free is to say every class is 500 people and there's no student support and and that is kind of the version of what MOOCs were, which is right. Like, we're going to lower costs by basically just putting lectures online and hoping you take the tests. So that actually doesn't work very well, and in some ways is harmful. But if you're talking about making college free while holding the quality of the educational product constant, I think I would love to see that happen. It'll be very expensive, because the generation that you mentioned, Jay, that basically went to college for free, that was a generation where about 20% of people went to college, and now we have about 60% of people going to college.
Right. So very big difference. Yeah,
3 times as expensive, even before considering the rising cost of paying people to teach. So there's this like overall thing where as the economy becomes more efficient and things like making TVs, it becomes relatively more expensive to pay people to teach, which is a technology that hasn't changed very much. And so I think the fiscal challenges to making college tuition free are great. On the other hand, as we get richer and more prosperous, I think we want more education. We want society to be more educated. And so while it would require a huge investment of societal resources, it would probably require higher taxes. You could sign me up for that, because I think that education is one of the greatest social policy interventions known to humankind. It tends to make people better off. It makes them happier. They live longer when they have more education. You're more likely to get married and, be a good parent. It has intergenerational benefits. And so I do think it's an investment that pays off, but it's a quite expensive one. So those are the challenges we face these days. But you could sign me up for more education on the margin. I think that'd be a good thing for America and for the world.
So, Athen, your student loans are going to be worth it. That's what we're hearing.
Whoa, good to know.
Probably, yes. They probably will be.
All right. Well, you've definitely given us something to think about on if college is worth it or not. And this has been David Deming from the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been delightful.
Okay, fun fact time here with the gang. So the question is a 60 Minutes Vanity Fair poll, which was asked in 2010. I'm going to have some problems with this, but let's ask the question and get some of the numbers first. You can no longer see any of the following performers live in concert, but if you could, which one or who would you like to see? The Beatles had 22%. I'm not surprised. Michael Jackson, 20%. Frank Sinatra, for those of you who remember him, 18%. Mozart comes in at 14, edging Billie Holiday at 9, and Houdini, who I don't think is so much of a singing voice, but I guess is a performer, at 9%. Probably the only question where you can get Mozart and Billie Holiday running neck and neck for 4th position. So are you guys surprised the Beatles, Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra?
I mean, I sort of was left flat a little bit by this question. I mean, my Beatles days, I think, it sort of came and went in the 90s. So by 2010, I don't know if I would have said the Beatles. Michael Jackson, I mean, I was a fan, but And, I mean, I do think I would have liked to have seen Frank Sinatra. I did get to see Tony Bennett before he passed away, and I think it would have been cool to see Frank Sinatra. But I don't know. I know Jay's probably going to talk to the choices here, and I'm sort of with him on this. I mean, and where does Houdini come into this? It's like heavily loaded toward music, and then you throw in Houdini. I mean, yeah, Houdini would have been cool, but
right. I'd like to see P.T. Barnum too, but what does that have to do with it? Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I guess the choices are in some ways predictable. Beatles, Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra. Yeah, Mozart. Why not Beethoven? Although he was composer, not whatever. So it's a little weird. I think it's a little weird. It does go back to our friends at 60 Minutes Vanity Fair poll, who do come up with the most interesting answers. The questions are good enough, but they always do these closed-ended questions where people can't just answer. They choose from a list, and their lists are always unusual, and Houdini is the most unusual one on here. The way I look at this is, if you could see them in their prime, like, would you go to Shea, 1964, and see the Beatles? Well, yeah, sure, beam me in, right? Would I want to see the Beatles now? Well, they're even older than the Stones, who are on tour, and who, are in their 80s. There's nothing wrong with people in their 80s being on stage. Got it. I have no interest in seeing an 80-something-year-old Mick Jagger prance around in tight pants. Just not really on my bucket list.
How about you folks of the younger generation? Why don't you provide a slightly different perspective on all this stuff?
Yeah, I think the choices are super interesting. I'm surprised that they didn't choose, like, John Lennon, that they went with all the Beatles, because the rest of the list is people who've passed, but half the Beatles are still kicking. I don't know. It's very interesting. I think I would go with the Beatles, but I don't know. I feel like the choices are so different that it's tough to choose. But I think I'm going to go with the Beatles.
All right, Delaney, what you got?
I agree with that. And the choices are kind of not so appealing to me. But I think I would have to go with Frank Sinatra solely to see him perform the song My Way, because I love that song. Other than that, I don't know, maybe Michael Jackson, but Frank Sinatra will be my pick.
How come no comedians are on there? Like, wouldn't you want to see Richard Pryor or Lenny Bruce?
Yeah.
I mean, wow, right? A live set that, I don't know. I could go on and on.
I know. I was thinking Simon and Garfunkel at this point. Somebody who they'd be good. They're still alive, but you can't get to see them because they're not.
Well, you can't. Right. Because they won't perform together. Yeah.
But anyway, okay, there we go. Another question from Vanity Fair, but something that certainly gets us all having an opinion.
And now.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Athen Hollis, Delaney Hayes, and Hunter Petro.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
And finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you
in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.
I did it my